Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined now by John Cornyn, Senator from Texas. Good morning, Senator Cornyn. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Hugh. Thanks for having me on.
Senator, you've been there for more than 20 years now, and you've seen a lot of debt limit bills that raise the debt limit. We've gone from $6 trillion in debt, under $6 trillion in 2000 to $31.5 trillion. Do you think it is responsible for Joe Biden to say he will not negotiate with Speaker McCarthy and Leader McConnell?
Absolutely not, Hugh. Historically, there's been some savings, some structural changes in our spending. As you know, about 2/3 of it is mandatory spending. It's on autopilot. Take out defense spending, and it's only about roughly 15% of discretionary spending. But COVID, of course, we blew through about $5 trillion on a bipartisan basis, dealing with what was a global emergency. But the Biden administration simply can't kick the habit and spend another $3 trillion in purely party line votes in the last 2 years. And so the president needs to step up to the negotiating table, and his position now, I believe, is unsustainable.
Now, I saw Leader McConnell say, and I applaud the leader, as usual, he's ahead of everybody else, on saying this is really between the speaker and the president because we're not going to be involved until those two come to a decision. Do you agree with Leader McConnell on that?
I do. It's just as a practical matter. We know that it takes 60 votes to get something done in the Senate, and it's highly unlikely that anything that 60 senators could agree on in the Senate would actually pass the House. So we need to take our lead from Speaker McCarthy, and I know he's meeting with President Biden on Wednesday, and hopefully that will lead to some constructive discussion and a negotiation which will get us by this. Nobody believes that the debt limit should be breached on a bipartisan basis. It's not leverage. So people need to step up and do the job they were elected to do.
Well, I think you've seen, as I have, and I'm frustrated by the media narrative that Joe Biden is not going to negotiate, and that's good for the country's credit rating. I think it's terrible for the country's credit rating for a president not to negotiate when the House just flipped. And there are some easy things. My number one thing to prove to people what we're talking about, I would zero out NPR and Corporation for Public Broadcasting because they're unnecessary. And so if we can't do easy, small things, how can we do big, hard things?
Yeah, I think, Joe Biden does have a history as a deal maker. In 2011, the Budget Control Act was something that he and Senator McConnell negotiated, which actually led to some containment of spending for a couple of years. Of course, nothing like that lasts forever, and so that's why here we find ourselves back on familiar ground. But, I think, Hugh, it may be that this debate is important to lay the groundwork toward the 2024 election. Our presidential nominee and candidates running for Congress would then have a basis to run on this issue, and then when they win, claim a mandate for serious change, which we need.
Now, Senator, I spent Thursday and Friday at the National Republican winter meeting of the National Republican Committee. Ronna McDaniel won with 70% of the votes on the first ballot. That was another media-contrived narrative. There was no real challenge. Harmeet ran and Mike Lindell ran, but they weren't close, and it was 70%. They're trying to set this up like Joe Biden's got the high ground. I don't think he does. Do you see any consistent pushback from Republicans that the president has got to sit down with McCarthy and negotiate?
Well, the mainstream media is the principal cheerleader for the Democratic Party. That hasn't changed. And so I think it's up to us in the members of the Republican Party in the House and the Senate to push back as hard as we can in every forum, at every opportunity we can, and to talk about, number one, avoiding this calamity that would occur if we did breach the debt ceiling, and secondly, what are we going to do to save future generations from having to pay the bills that we're writing the checks on right now? Everybody understands the importance of fiscal responsibility, but nobody wants to engage in it because it's not particularly popular. Spending money is popular; cutting money is not.
And we can't do sequestration of defense again. Your colleague from Texas, Chip Roy, says 2022 levels on non-discretionary, non-defense spending, 2023 levels on defense spending. I don't think that's enough for defense, but it's a starting point. But I do want some symbolic stuff. We have 1 minute. If you could cut one thing or make one change in the budget talks, what would it be?
Well, I think the audit that was done of the Defense Department in 2018 was a good start. I'm a defense hawk, and I believe that's the number one responsibility of the federal government to keep the peace, to defend our nation and our way of life. But there's no question that the Defense Department could trim things that are no longer needed. We're pivoting from the global war on terror to great power competition, and we ought to reassess the tools we need in order to keep the peace and to defend our nation, and that would be a good place to start.
Well said. I mean, just empowering the Secretary of Defense to lay off half of his GS-12 and under levels would be a good place to start. We need the executives, but I'm not sure we need all those contract agents. John Cornyn, Senator Extraordinaire from Texas. Always a pleasure, Senator. Thank you for joining me to kick off Monday.